To watch all of my exclusive content not featured here on my channel, log on to my website at imjustheretomake-you-think.com/films. OCO everyone. Some of my new incoming subscribers have asked me to create a video concerning DNA genealogy testing and DNA genealogy test results. And of course I have done so already on numerous occasions here on my channel, but I don't mind sharing this information with you all again. Now, I produced a film on this topic of discussion a while ago called Biological Warfare, in which I was able to dive a lot deeper into many details that cannot be shared here, because I tried that already, and either the videos have been removed or they could still be public on my channel right now, but have been hidden away from you to see for whatever reason. So I figured, why not at least attempt to cover this topic again, and maybe you'll be able to see it this time around without any issues. Oh, and just in case you were wondering about how to view my film called Biological Warfare, you may do so by using the links below that takes you directly to my website at imjustheretomake-you-think.com. Let's start this video off with something that I presented in the past that you might have missed. No, it's not an Easter egg per se, but it does allow the viewer to understand what we are dealing with here when it comes to DNA genealogy test or ancestry test results. And here's what I mean by that. On the date of October 28th, 2010, Henry Louis Gates Jr. is given a public address located at the University of California in front of students and fellow professors on the topic of, quote, genealogy, genetics, and African American history. At the time of this public broadcast, Henry Louis Gates Jr. was a professor at the Alfonso Fletcher University and the director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research. Keep in mind that he is also responsible for the cultivation of the site known as slavevoyages.org, in which I forced them to change their information 2 years ago by utilizing my research on publicly verifiable evidence against their conceptualism and conceptual arts. I updated my viewers about that portion of this topic in a live stream that I'll link up above right now. So during his address or lecture or whatever you want to call it, he shared some vital information that not only exposes himself, but also exposes how people can be easily manipulated by way of social engineering experiments. Listen closely.
There was Alex Haley coming out of the blue, could go all the way to Africa. He could go to this ship that brought his African ancestors over, and then he went all the way back to Gambia. So I was totally jealous of Alex Haley. And so I had a profound and severe case of Ruth's envy. But I figured, well, I'll never, only Alex Haley could do that, right? So I got to know Quincy Jones in 1999. Anthony Appia, my dear friend, and I edited the Africana Encyclopedia, and then we founded Africana.com, which we needed some investors, and by this time it's complicated, but I gotten to be friends with Quincy Jones, still a great friend of mine. And Quincy introduced me to Alex Haley. And more than that, Quincy, it turned out, was obsessed with genealogy as well. Quincy scored the music for Roots. So for Christmas, he would give people their family trees. So, you know, I thought about that, and but there was nothing I could do about that. Well, here's a funny thing happened. You never know. The Bible says be careful what you wish for. In the year 2000, a young black geneticist named Dr. Rick Kittles, who at the time was teaching at Howard University, sent me a letter. He's now at the University of Chicago Medical School. And he said that he was asking various African-American men if they would submit themselves to this new test. And through this test, he could trace on your mother's line where in Africa you were from. Man, that was some serious stuff. And I said, yeah, I mean, I called him right away and I said, definitely.
Now, at this point of the video, Henry was referring to a guy by the name of Rick Kittles, who is one of the co-founders of a genealogy DNA testing company called African Ancestry that's promoted strictly to people of color that believes they may have some African descent within their lineage. And so this company claims to be able to trace people's ancestral roots back to a specific present-day African country and tribe or ethnic group by way of a living being's saliva. Now, it's quite apparent that this task is merely impossible to accomplish in this day and age of technology. I mean, even the #1 genealogy DNA testing company in America called Ancestry DNA can't even do such a thing for their own customers. So how can a new college graduate gain the funding possible to obtain access to biobanks of millions of people's DNA data without even meeting them in person? And how can these biobanks obtain millions of people's DNA data without them digging up the graveyards of billions of deceased people all over America and any other said place that they would love to connect you to? Keep in mind, companies in this fashion are very limited to only comparing your data with the data of other living people. So that has absolutely nothing to do with anyone's historical genetic makeup altogether. And no matter how some people may feel about genealogy DNA tests, there are people out there warning folks about the entertainment surrounding genealogy DNA testing and genealogy DNA test results. And even Henry Louis Gates Jr. himself chuckled at the idea that genealogy DNA test results are in close proximity of the truth.
And he said that of all the people he'd written to, nobody was writing him back. And I couldn't figure out why, but I later found out why. So I said, would you want me to come to Washington? He goes, no, I'll come up to Harvard Square. It's where I was living. So about a week later, he showed up. And now, I've had many operations. I broke my hip when I was playing football when I was about 14. It was misdiagnosed by country doctors. I've had a zillion operations on my leg, right? So I know about having blood extracted. If you could see my veins is just look at a vial and blood pours out, right? I'm very easy to get my blood. Well, after half an hour, I realized that two things. That Dr. Rick Kittles is a brilliant geneticist, but he's not brilliant at extracting blood. I also realized why no other black male was stupid enough to let him come up to try to take their blood. Because that brother kept poking around, and I thought, damn, this Kunta Kinte stuff is hard work. How badly do I want to know where I'm from in Africa? But I really wanted to know. I'd wanted to know since I was 9 years old, so, you know, let's go for it. So finally, see, at the time, you had to extract a lot of DNA in order to run the test. Now, you just swab your cheek or spit in the test tube, depending on the company that you use. We could talk about that a little bit later.
Now, it's very important to note that he states this at this very moment, because he then later debunks these processes by saying that you cannot tell what tribe someone was a part of historically by attempting either of these processes he just mentioned.
So it's very easy and it's very painless. So I waited and I waited and I waited. You know, Rick Kittles went back to Washington. I waited for the result. And I didn't hear from him. So finally I called him. And you know how people do. He picked up the phone after I called him about 1 million times. He goes, oh man, I was just about to return your phone call. I said, Rick, what's up, man? Where am I from in Africa? Where are my people? You know, I want to jump on a plane and go. I thought I'd buy some land, you know, get a fine little African sister, you know, to hook up. I was single at the time, don't get me wrong. I'm still single. So he said, well, we had to run, your results were anomalous. And we had to run them many times. But we finally have figured out where you're from. You are descended on your mother's side from the Nubian people. Now, all African Americans, not all African Americans, but many African Americans want to be descended from one or two ethnic groups. Either the Zulu, because the Chaka Zulu, and the Zulu kicked the English in the behind in the Boer Wars, right? Until they finally were overcome. But you want to be Zulu, or you want to be Nubian. Who were the Nubians? The Nubians were the black pharaohs, right? The Nubians are in the Bible. The 25th dynasty was the Nubian dynasty. In Egyptian art, they always hated the Nubians. Nubians are always represented as darker. You know, they were warring kingdoms. And Nubia ran from what today's Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, up to the Aswan Dam, the second cataract in the Nile River. And so a Nubian, and all these people wanted to be Nubians, descended from the black pharaohs. So my friend Molefi Asante, you know, the founder of Afrocentricity, we argued a lot in public, but we're very good friends privately. I joke, every time he attacks me, I get a raise at Harvard, so it's cool. So I attack him, you know. We do what Malcolm and Martin couldn't do, you know. Set it up, and then we go split the money and slap five and go to Sylvia's, have fried chicken. Believe me, that's a much better way to function than hating each other. So I called Molefi first thing. I said, Molefi, I just got my results back. I am a Nubian. Where are you from? I am the true African prince. My friend Anthony Appiah, whose uncle was the Asantehene, the king of the Asante people. When Rick Kittles sent me a certificate announcing I was Nubian, Anthony Appiah looked at it and said, "What a ton of rubbish." Now, why would he say that? Well, there's a slight problem with being either Zulu or Nubian if you're African American. You know what the problem is? None of our ancestors who came here in slavery came from South Africa, the Zulu people, or from Nubia. None, zero. Egypt is over here. The slaves came from the area from Senegal down to Angola. 97% of the slaves came from that region, all right? So, you know how long it would take them to walk from Sudan to Senegal or to Angola? It just didn't happen. So, I looked at Anthony and I said, "You're just jealous." Because I am a Nubian prince. I didn't care. I had it framed. I put it up in my living room so everybody could see that I was from royalty. So I didn't think about it. I thought maybe it was strange. Maybe it was on a trade route. You know, there were great Muslim trade routes. You know, today, this is important for the students. In my time, we were taught that the Africans were these benighted people, and they were too stupid to build a boat or to be curious about the world and cross the Sahara Desert. It was rubbish. Africans were just as curious as anybody else. The Sahara Desert was a highway. It wasn't a barrier. So I thought, well, and there were great trade routes. So I thought maybe my Nubian descendant had come over and ended up being tricked by some white man and ended up in Maryland or Virginia or something. So that was cool. And if I needed an interpretation, believe me, I could have produced one.
Now, I would like for you to keep in mind what he just stated here. He said, if I needed an interpretation, believe me, I could have produced one. So in other words, he's informing everyone that he would not hesitate to create a detailed explanation about something that is not actually there to begin with. And he did in fact create his own explanation after he noticed what Rick Kittles and others were doing in order to produce these test results. So at this point of his address, he not only exposes genealogy DNA tests and genealogy DNA testing results, but he also exposes his fellow colleagues. And he didn't forget to add himself into the equation.
So, and by the way, you know, the Zulu thing, when Oprah was finally in the first series, and we gave her DNA test, basically the next day she went to South Africa to announce that she was opening what became the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. She was in an auditorium like 75,000 people or something, and she announced that she just had the test and that she was Zulu. So it broke on CNN. I was sitting in my living room minding my own business and said, Oprah Winfrey's a Zulu. So I called Rick Kittles and I said, Rick, did you tell Oprah she was a Zulu? He goes, no, man, she made that up herself. It's a true story. It's a true story. I would lie to make you laugh, but I'm telling you a true story. So I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her Zulu, man. You know? I said, you back there making it up anyway. I said, you back there making it up anyway. Nobody believe you could take some spit and figure out a tribe? What, are you crazy? So anyway, I was a Nubian and it was cool. Well, here's the miracle, one of the many miracles, thank God, that happened in my life. I got up in the middle of the night, and to be honest, I have to tell you the truth, I got up to go to the bathroom. And I was standing there in the bathroom, minding my own business. And I had an idea, and here's what was the idea. I would take this passion I had from the time I was 9 years old in genealogy, and I would get 8 prominent African Americans, and I would trace their family tree back into the abyss of slavery, back to the time when the paper trail disappears, because inevitably it disappears for all of us, all of our ancestors. It just wasn't a paper trail. You can't trace people, there's no printed record. And then when the paper trail disappears, I would do their DNA and tell them where they were from in Africa. I was so excited, I had tears in my eyes.
So now you know that Henry Louis Gates Jr. saw the opportunity to capitalize on the pains of so-called blacks here in America, and their most inconvenient pains are their stolen identities in history. So Henry decided to do exactly what he saw Rick Kittles do, except Henry was approved to make it a national television series. So if Rick Kittles was back there making it up anyway, what do you think Henry Louis Gates Jr. was up to? Let's clear up some confusion that has since made the public feel as though paternal and maternal DNA test results are the exact same as DNA ancestry test results. Some of you may be aware of this, but for those of you who are not, the term paternal is referring to the father, and of course maternal refers to the mother. Paternal and maternal DNA test results were concluded based on comparing a living individual's data with another living individual's data. So, if you were in dire need to find out who your biological mother or father is, these particular parental tests will analyze your 23 chromosomes, which are inherited from both of your biological parents, because you will carry one chromosome that came directly from each of your parents. Most companies require a sample of DNA data by swabbing the mouth from each parent and their possible child or children. Some companies claim that they can even conduct parental tests without having both of the parents' data available to them. But this is only capable of happening by testing the data of the missing individual's parents or first-degree relatives, unless the company was granted permission to conduct an autopsy on that individual if applicable. Now, if you listened to me closely, you now know that paternal and maternal DNA testing are very limited and can only go as far as comparing your data with other living relatives of your direct family, unless you give them permission to conduct an autopsy on all of your deceased family members, which is very unrealistic. So, are paternal and or maternal DNA test results the same as DNA ancestry test results? The answer is no, and I will explain why. But before I do so, let's go over another common theory that the public utilizes and inadvertently gives DNA ancestry test results more credibility based solely on the scientific credibility of mitochondrial DNA test results. To put it in plain terms, Mitochondrial DNA is the genetic material found in mitochondria that gets passed down from a child's mother exclusively, due to it being transmitted through the female egg only. So, this means that the mother's sons and daughters can receive this mitochondrial DNA, but the sons of the mother cannot pass down their mother's mitochondrial DNA to their children as an adult. This particular DNA does not combine with any other DNA. It comes directly from the maternal line over many generations, and it goes virtually unchanged. This is why mitochondrial DNA test results cannot be compared to any genealogical test, due to the fact that it is more of an anthropological test, because it cannot be tied to any specific surname, since the mother traditionally takes on the surname of the father. Also, mitochondrial DNA test results are not useful for historical genealogical research due to how it mutates much slower than Y-DNA and how identical it is to your mother's maternal ancestors of thousands of years ago, and also how identical it is to millions of other living people today. Side note, this also exposes how there is realistically no way of determining in a truthful sense whether if your common ancestor lived recently or thousands of years ago. Which should also make you ask the question, are those anthropologists accurate with claiming that some historical skull artifact they discovered was of an individual that lived some thousands of years ago? Millions of people are drawn to the open theory that a mysterious DNA ancestry test can somehow provide the most accurate and accountable information of one's family traits by percentage and/or location. But they fail to notice that all district and Supreme Courts do not recognize nor approve of any genealogy DNA ancestry test results as documented proof or evidence of one's true identity. What these money-hungry companies do not tell you, or rather do not show you, is what really happens when a person hands over their real and private data to the majority of these popular DNA ancestry test companies. Companies like 23andMe, African Ancestry, and Ancestry DNA, etc., have created a way to secretly make you agree with allowing these companies full controllable rights over your very own DNA information. This means that these companies are literally taking your private information and selling it back for medical economic growth and research purposes to Big Pharma for larger than life profits. Now, this may seem harmless to some of you, but that depends on how a person truly feels about sharing their data to God knows who across the globe, and they cannot opt out of it once they have agreed to have a DNA ancestry test kit sent to them. Did you know this? There are millions of people who have no idea that this is happening due to the purposely very confusing verbiage used inside of these companies' terms of service. They do not make it user-friendly, nor do they commonly refer to their procedure as something the public should know about, but should make you wonder what else is hiding behind curtain number 2 and 3. Furthermore, keeping the consumer in the dark as to what the company actually does with your data while you wait for the results in the mail. More about what they actually do with your DNA data in my movie called Biological Warfare that is available exclusively on Vimeo on demand and I'm just here to make you think.com/films. Another major red flag is the fact that many of these DNA ancestry test companies are requiring the consumer to participate in medical research as a condition of obtaining a DNA ancestry test kit. They tried to hide that major key requirement in a safe place where they know people would not be careful enough to check and read the terms of service for themselves. In fact, obtaining the customer's permission in this fashion is hardly informed consent, which is a direct prerequisite for a subject's participation in research. Genealogy tracking has become big business, with many companies charging up to thousands of dollars to allegedly trace your DNA data to specific historical figures or ethnic groups in the distant past by analyzing ancestry tests. While popular DNA ancestry companies insist that they are able to provide valuable and accurate DNA ancestry test results to their consumers, there are multiple other genealogists, scientists, and professors of the genetic field that have completely debunked this notion. Scientists have even offered multiple public warnings that these ancestry tests have little to no scientific backing whatsoever and are often so unreliable and inaccurate that they amount to genetic astrology. For example, two professors of UCL, or the University College London, named Mark G. Thomas and David Balding, gave a viral public warning about DNA ancestry test results and the pseudo-ethnical background stories given by these companies to their consumers within their results, calling them, quote, personally meaningless. They are just speculation from thin evidence. The genetic ancestry business uses a phenomenon well known in other areas such as horoscopes, where general information is interpreted as being more personal than it really is. End quote. They both highlighted uncritical media coverage of the issue as well. Professor Balding mentioned that, quote, news items about famous people being related to historical figures often comes from PR material provided by genetic testing companies. Then Professor Thomas stated that the idea that we can actually read our ancestry directly from our genes is, quote, absurd. This is business, and the business is genetic astrology. What is genetic astrology? On March 7th, 2013, genealogist Dr. Tabitha Innocent stated, quote, it is well known that horoscopes use vague statements, which recipients think are more tailored than they really are, referred to as the Forer effect. Genetic ancestry tests do a similar thing, and many exaggerated far beyond the available evidence about human origins. You cannot look at DNA and read it like a book or a map of a journey. For the most part, these tests cannot tell you the things that they claim to. They are little more than genetic astrology. End quote. Professors Mark Thomas and David Balding that I mentioned earlier collaborated with many genealogists like Dr. Tabitha Innocent, Dr. Turi King, Dr. Lunez Chakai, Dr. Rosalind Harding, and Professors Mark Jobling and Guido Barbuani to create an informative scientific campaign called Sense About Genetic Ancestry Testing that quietly debunked genealogy DNA ancestry tests and their results they sell to consumers today. The scientists and professors agreed that the results are pseudo due to the fact that, quote, Genetic profiles cannot provide accurate information about an individual's ancestry. End quote. Though advertisements of ancestry testing companies give the impression that your unique DNA data can tell you a specific story about your ancestry, the scientists say that the same history that you get can be given to thousands of other people as well, with or without a similar ethnical background, and that any number of different possible interpretations can come from your DNA ancestry results, which is why you won't ever get the exact same results when using different DNA ancestry companies. So in conclusion, DNA ancestry test results are nothing more than a bunch of conjectures and inaccurate information, and should be treated that way, meaning that you should know that it is just for entertainment purposes only. I'm just here to make you think.